Hi, my name is Katarina Sullivan and I would like to welcome you to my YouTube channel. The big topic everyone is talking about this week is inflation. I've seen quite a lot about this and I feel like now is a good time to plug some knowledge gaps on the topic. Let's start by taking a look at what inflation is. Inflation occurs when the costs of goods and services increases. For example, if you are paying $4 for a loaf of bread and then all of a sudden you're paying $4.50 for a loaf of bread, that is an example of inflation in action. We see inflation each year at a very low rate, usually between 1% and 2%. It was announced earlier this week that inflation rates have hit 5.1%. This is massive. A lot of people are quick to blame the government for the interest rate rise. But it really comes down to two key factors: the war in Ukraine and the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. The reason interest rates rise has to do with what is called cost push inflation. This is when the costs of production, such as raw goods and wages, increases. Businesses then have to pass these costs on to the consumer. In the case we're seeing at the moment, cost push inflation is occurring due to supply chain issues. This means certain raw goods are more expensive and harder to come by. Thank you, Mr. Putin. Some economists are arguing that it actually had very little to do with the crisis in Ukraine and more to do with the high number of lockdowns we have experienced and the amount of government handouts we received as a consequence. It's hard to definitively point the finger at either one or the other, and it's hard to know what could have been done better. Some parties, politicians and candidates have been saying the government was not providing enough support to Australians financially throughout the pandemic. Meanwhile, economists were arguing that there was too much support. It's been a balancing act all along, how to protect people's health and safety without locking down the country too much and causing the economy to suffer, which in turn has long-term effects on people's physical and mental health and well-being. Given how little we knew about COVID-19 right at the beginning, it was hard to know what the right thing was to do. Let it run wild, or mass lockdowns requiring handouts to allow people to continue to participate in the economy. And it wasn't just Australia who wasn't too sure of their approach. The issue of inflation is not just affecting us, it is hitting the entire world. Over the course of the pandemic, I've had this sense that we've become a bit more politically insular. We seem to sometimes forget that we are one country among almost 200 others around the world, and we are therefore a cog in a giant global economic system. Globally, countries are experiencing inflation rates far higher than ours, some up to almost 300%. Between 7% and 10% inflation is where our OECD counterparts are currently sitting. New Zealand, our closest neighbour, is experiencing an inflation rate increase of 6.9%. The only region which seems to be largely unaffected by all of this is East Asia. The Reserve Bank will be the one to respond, most likely by hiking interest rates. How this helps inflation comes down to demand. If people have less access to money, especially money that is loaned, they are less likely to spend on things that aren't necessary, and will therefore be putting less demand on supply. For example, if someone were to take out a secured personal loan to buy a new car, not because they needed it, just because they wanted a new car, they are more likely to be turned off by that idea due to the high interest rates. This frees up a car in the market for someone who actually needs a new car. Over the past few years, interest rates are the lowest they have been in a very long time. This has been good for many Australians who have had the ability to pay off more of their mortgages and loans. However, we all knew that interest rates at some point would rise. They weren't going to stay this low forever. The bad news for the coalition is that it is hit right in the middle of a campaign. This idea of reducing money supply is the best step that can be taken to keep our inflation somewhat under control. Now comes the election 2022 question. What can the parties do? Unfortunately, no party nor candidate can actually do too much to fix this. This has been out of everyone's control from the get-go. And anyone who promises they can fix this is lying through their teeth. There's little things like the cost of living payment that the coalition has promised to pensioners, but that is barely going to make a dent in a 5.1% inflation rate. Of course, interest rate increases to limit the supply of money, as I mentioned earlier, is the best step a government can make. This includes something such as increasing reserve requirements. Reserve requirements is the amount of money a bank has to have on hand to cover withdrawals. If the amount of reserve requirements increases, banks have less money on hand to lend to customers, again limiting that supply of money. A lot of people are calling for an increase to wages to deal with the cost of living pressures. While this seems to make sense initially, cost of living is more expensive, therefore I need more money in my pocket to pay for it, it doesn't actually solve the problem. In fact, it makes it worse. If businesses are forced to pay staff more, they will automatically pass on that additional cost to the consumer by, you guessed it, raising their prices. So I advise you to be wary of hoping that an increase to wages will help us out of this. Unfortunately, it will most likely lead to a further increase in inflation. For the past few years, I've worked with a lot of young people around financial literacy and fiscal responsibility. I cannot tell you how many times over the last few years I've seen young people who have come to me with concerns about not being able to buy groceries a week after trading in their perfectly well-working iPhone 12 for an iPhone 13. I know I'm opening myself up to a bit of a smashed avo debate here, but this is a really good opportunity to talk about budgeting. Societal pressures to have the latest of everything and the most aesthetic looking meals out 3 to 4 times a week are a real concern, especially for young people. I've seen people in their 20s with over $100,000 in debt due to weekly brunches, almost nightly Uber Eats, and spending on gadgets way above their budget. My first piece of advice during this massive increase to inflation is to stop spending and really look at what you need over what you want. If you are buying less of what you want, this will actually help decrease demand, which in turn pushes down costs over time. And I sit here giving this advice as someone who owns a fashion design label, which is a highly want-driven industry. So I'm sacrificing my own business profits in this piece of advice for the good of the greater economy. Buy what you need, not what you want. Of course, there are many Australians who are in a situation where they are already living on a need-only basis. These are people who will be hit the hardest. For those watching this video who have access, this will now be the time to be compassionate and find ways to give to those who have less. We can expect over the coming days to see the Reserve Bank of Australia announce the expected increase in interest rates. It's not a matter of when, it's a matter of how much. Lastly, I want to finish off with some notes on this latest period of the campaign trail before I wrap up. If I see one more Simpsons meme on a political party social media page, I will actually scream. Last video, I complained about how childish I felt the coalition was acting, and now Labor have stooped to their level, which is really disappointing. I'm not seeing enough sensible vision from any of the parties. And by sensible vision, I mean policies that aren't just a campaign line, but they have a tangible implementation plan behind them. I will be doing videos picking each of the party's policies apart to help guide you in thinking more critically about some of these lines we get sold during an election campaign. In the meantime, we're gearing up for early voting to open on May 9th, so there will be more videos in the coming days on how to ensure you can participate meaningfully in democracy this May. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your family and friends. Please feel free to comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.